Okay. So this coming Thursday, the 23rd, we're going to meet and we're going to do our sample exam, which is going to be based on the math review. I want to put you all at ease by letting you know, one, it's going to be graded as a homework assignment and it's going to be graded based on substantial completeness. So what that means is, you've shown your work for the problem and submitted things correctly. When we do our exams in this class, um, and you don't have to meet on Zoom if you don't want to. I just leave the Zoom open, not to proctor, but to give you all a chance that if you wanted to ask a question or something like that, about the exam or the exam procedure, if you had any challenges or difficulties or whatever, that I could help walk you through how to solve those problems. But I would make the exam available, and then you would go to Ignithium, and you'd go to the Ignithium assessments, and you'd log in on Ignithium assessments, and then I'll give you a code, and then you'll select the exam associated with that code, and it'll pull up a version of the exam for you that's going to look a lot like the practice homework problems. In fact, I don't think, I would have to check, but I don't think there's a single question. There may be one that doesn't show up on the homework, but it's almost all of the questions come directly from the homework. But again, you all know that the questions are randomized, so everybody's going to get a different version. And the difference on the assessments is that your version will be stable, which means that if for whatever reason you happen to get logged out, or there was some technical difficulty or whatever, then you could just log back in and you get the same version you had before. There is one thing that I'll tell you about, and I'll show you more explicitly when we meet on Thursday and do the sample exam. But your responses are graded automatically, and you can check them right away. There's a little bit of a challenge in doing that, and I'll explain that when we talk about it on Thursday. Number one, I have to release the grades so you can see, what your responses were and what the correct responses were and whether or not you got it right. But also, and I'll just say this quickly in passing for those of you that are here, so it won't sound unfamiliar when we talk about it on Thursday, but Ignithium records every single thing that you put into it. And the only thing that you'll be scored on is your last entry. So the way that I configured Ignithium to display your grades is I asked, well, show me all of their responses. And I just kind of figured, if I was a student, I would want to know that the system had been recording everything that I'd put into it instead of just my last response. I mean, you can imagine a situation where somebody says, oh, well, I put in an answer, but it's not showing up on the system. And then I would say, well, maybe, it's like an earlier answer or something like that. So the way that I kind of avoid that sort of problem is I just make sure that all of the stuff you put in there is available, which means that when you go through to figure out your grade, you have to kind of be smart and say, okay, I can only get 1 point for each question, and I can only count the last, and all of them will be time stamped, so I can only count the last response that I entered for a given question. So if you use common sense, you won't have any trouble. But if you're not careful, then you would see things like, some people will enter the same answer 3 times to the same question. And if it's exactly the same answer and it's correct, then you'll see, oh, it looks like there's 3 points for that question. Well, obviously you can't get 3 points for one question. You just get 1 point, and it's based on your last answer. So when I download the data at the end to calculate your grade, then I just filter it for the last response to each question, and then I add up the total. And if you do that, when you look at the grades that are displayed, then you'll get the same answer that I'll get. But if you do something weird, then you won't come up with the right answer. So yeah, that's the main thing is as soon as I release them, you'll be able to review your grades. But just remember, the grades are also preliminary, because I also have to look at your actual written work that you submitted and see that it supports your answer. So there's no partial credit. You have to enter the right answer into the system, but you also have to show work to support that answer. If you don't do both of those things, then you can lose a point. So for example, suppose you were really pressed for time or something like that, and you just, you didn't write down, details to support your answer, but like you guessed on a question and you just put in, number 2, or 2 is the answer, right? And you happen to get it correct. Well, you still would lose that point, because I would look at your exam and I'd be like, oh, well, there's no work to support this. So we care about your work, and we care about you getting the right answer. So just to be clear, what the grading standards are. So the other thing too is that when you're gonna upload your exam work, you're gonna have 3 pieces to it. There's gonna be a cover page, which I'll show you in a minute, and then like your homework, you're gonna take a picture of, or a screenshot of what Ignithium is showing you, and you're gonna paste that in your document as well. An important thing is, you remember when you're properly logged in to assessments, it will show your name at the top. Okay, so and maybe I should put that in bold. I'll edit it right now. Bold and bold and underline. Oh no, maybe. Okay, maybe red. Okay, so I want to see that. Obviously, some of the exams are longer, so you might take a couple different screenshots or a couple different pictures with your phone or whatever to get it all in view. But you need to show me the part that has your name at the top displayed, because that tells me that you were logged in properly. If you don't log in properly, and that's really more for your protection than anything else. It's not like, I could be fooled and you could use somebody else's or some weird thing like that, because at the end of the day, everybody is going to have a unique version. And like normally when I do this in class, I'll even have students sit next to each other with their laptops, and everybody will log in, and I'll say, well, show your screen to your neighbor behind you, in front of you, whatever. And the universe of random numbers is so big, it's like on the order of like 10,000 that out of all the questions, I very rarely see 2 students that have the same version of a question. So like it wouldn't matter, because you have when you're logged in, you have an ID in the system, and then from that ID, it randomly generates questions for you. So I just want to, like, obviously everybody here has integrity and they're honest and the rest of it, but there's really no way for you to fool me or fool the system, because I can pull up, your version anyway. But if you show me your name at the top, then that tells me, at least at that point in time, you were logged in. There's one other thing, which again, I'll show you again on Thursday, but I'll mention it now, is that every time you enter an answer into the system, you'll get a little message, kind of like the feedback message you get on the homework, but it's not going to tell you the answer. Instead, it's going to say your answer was recorded. And if by any chance, because of Wi-Fi issues or something like that, you happen to get logged out and you put in your answer, it wouldn't return that message to you that you're recorded. It would say something like, please log in and earn points or something like that. So what I tell students to do is every time you put in the answer, look to see if you get that message. If you do, then it's on the system and you're good. And as you go through, entering your answers, you should be careful and make sure that you're getting that message every time, because if you don't, then that means, again, that you weren't logged in, and so it's not recording your answer. So you got to be careful. Again, everybody's at home and everybody has different internet connections and all the rest of it. And if you have answered half of the questions and you got the I'm recorded or it's been recorded message, and then for whatever reason, your internet connection drops and the sky falls and you have to log back in, you don't have to answer those questions again. If you want to, you can. It won't display your last answer. It'll just be a blank box, but you can, if you want to, put in another answer if it makes you feel good, and make sure it's recorded again, because only your last one will be counted. But again, if you're pressed for time, you're like, I already answered these 10 questions, I got the recorded message, you can just go on and answer the remaining questions and there won't be a problem. And so you need to include a copy of your questions, and you need to include your work after the questions that support those answers. And for me, it's very helpful when I look at this, if you show me your work and then your final answer is circled on your paper, so it's very easy to find for each of the questions. If you present work that's easy to understand in terms of your work, then that's a chance that there's not going to be a mistake, in terms of trying to find, what calculations are supporting what answer and that sort of thing. So if you make it easy for me, and I can just give you the points easily and move on. But if you make it hard, then you put, things at risk. Okay, so okay. So the next thing that I wanted to show you is an example of the type of cover sheet that you'll see. So I'll post this for you all. There'll be a different one for each exam. And the directions are slightly different, but the main part is the same. You get a document like this, and you would just type your name in, Greg Hunter, whatever, and which assessment you're doing, and then the date, and then the code that I give you, right? And then you're supposed to, after reading the instructions, you're supposed to put your initials, so we all know that you agree that you read them thoroughly. And this is the main thing that I wanted to mention to you. So I'll just highlight it for right now. We'll come back to it so we don't forget it. I'll put it in red, okay? It gives you, the times for the exams and stuff like that. This particular sample exam, we're just going to begin during our regular lecture time at 8:30. When we do the exams for the regular section, or the regular exams, we do the midterms, I give you more time by eating into the activity time. So we'll start earlier. And and this just tells you all the stuff that I told you, be careful if you don't get the recorded message, make sure that your name's at the top so you're logged in. And then I give you an exam end time, and then I give you a submission time. And I normally give about a half hour between the time the exam ends, which means you can no longer put answers into Ignithium. And again, it's all time stamped. So if you do, you're like, well, it's still open, so I can still put something in. Well, it's time stamped. So, if it's after 9:15, I'll just filter out those answers, and they won't count. But and there's a submission link. In this case, it's not going to be Blackboard, it's going to be on Canvas, right? And I give you about a half hour. That half hour is supposed to give you time to prepare your document for submission, because you need your cover page, you need your exam questions, and then you need your work all together in one document to upload to Canvas. Okay. And so, that's not, I mean, it is true that, if you happen to want to fix, or make something a little bit neater in your work or something, you can do that. And, I don't really care. But you have about a half hour to put everything together and submit it. Okay. And so I'm going to tell you guys about the substitute questions, but I'm going to ask right now, does anybody have any questions about any of the things that I've talked about so far?
This cover sheet you will be sending us, right? Or we have to create by our
No.
own?
I'm gonna post a version of it on Canvas for you to be able to download. So you'll have
Okay.
access to it. Yeah. I want everybody to have the same cover sheet. You don't have to create one, because it's supposed to have, the basic information and these instructions. And obviously you couldn't create your own because, they're my instructions, right? So, but yeah, I will provide this for you. But I'll probably post this on Canvas like first thing in the morning on Thursday, so you won't see it before then. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Yes, when's the official start time? Because on this I notice it says 8 a.m., but then the availability on Canvas I think said 9:30.
Yeah, I think it should say 8:30, but well, okay. So this is the thing, right? You're going to take the exam starting at 8:30 because this is our sample exam. So we're not going to like give extra time. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's going to be a short exam. It's going to be simple questions, and it's just to go through the procedure, right? So don't worry about that. But the submission availability is at the end of the exam, right? So you're saying, oh, well, it's like available at 9:30. Well, you're not gonna, I mean, you could finish your exam before 9:30, that's fine, but you're not gonna upload it before 9:30. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good question, but the only thing that happens on Canvas is you upload your work and the cover page and your questions. You're not doing any exam stuff on Canvas. It's all happening on Ignithium. Okay. So, but good question. Any other questions? Okay. So now I want to talk about the substitute questions. So I will also upload an example of a set of questions that are, and this is my way of explaining it, that are properly rendered. Okay. So one of the things you have to kind of bring with you to the exam is your knowledge of what a proper question is. And I'll tell you the reason for that. Well, one, you're going to be an economist. You should know what a supply and demand model looks like, right? And for example, or the other types of models we're going to talk about in this class. But because Ignithium, and you guys might have seen this, but because Ignithium has this, big universe of random numbers, sometimes there's a glitch and it'll render something improperly. So I don't know if you all have seen it, but sometimes it'll put like a plus and a minus sign like together right next to each other, which really based on the model doesn't make sense. Or sometimes it'll be a 0, and if you were to do the calculation, it would imply that you had to divide by 0. So like it's a bad question. And it doesn't happen that often, but I would say, I've been using this system for about 6 years, and if you ask me, out of all the exams that happen every semester and stuff like that, there's 1 or 2 students on like one of the exams, like on maybe one question, and sometimes it'll affect 3 or 4 questions because the questions go together. But there might be 1 or 2 students on 1 or 2 exams each semester that has an issue where the page is not properly rendered, and that's okay. You still go ahead and take a picture of your questions and show them. But the next part of the procedure is, well, okay, there are these substitute questions that you can use if you have an improperly rendered question. So if I saw an improperly rendered question on my exam on question 5, for example, then I would go to the substitute questions and I would use substitute question 5. And then on my cover page, I would alert Dr. Hunter and say, I'm substituting question 5 from the substitute questions. And, but that's what the substitute questions are for. And you can only use them if you got an improperly rendered question. So if you don't know, based on doing the practice and the other things in the class, whether or not the question is properly posed, then that's kind of on you. Because if you have a properly rendered question, but you don't recognize it as such, and you use a substitute question, well, then you wouldn't, be eligible to count that. But in most cases, and I'll point out to you as we go forward, in each one of the sections that we do, I have seen like certain things pop up that are, common ways in which, the problems don't render correctly. And I'll point those out to you so to look for them. At this point in time, I would just say, you're going to look for zeros where there shouldn't be, and you're going to look for plus and minus signs where there should just be either a plus or a minus. And there's not really anything else to worry about at that, at this juncture that I've seen. But the substitute questions are there in case you encounter one of those problems. So you don't just say, I can't answer this question. You just answer the substitute one. And if you do answer the substitute question, it doesn't really matter in Ignithium if you put, something like the correct, because it's not going to auto score you. If you use a substitute question, I'm going to score your exam, directly based on the correct answers for the substitute questions. And I'll just look at, what you've submitted and go to that question in your work and then look for your answer in your work and then score you accordingly. But some students, they want to put the correct answer for the substitute question into the box. You can do that. But there's not going to be any auto scoring on those questions if you use substitute questions. And again, it's not common, but I have to tell you about it because it does happen occasionally, and it's better to be aware of that possibility. So this is an example of one. I give you little examples here. Your demand curve is not gonna look like that. Yeah, so if you're aware of it, then you can still go ahead and proceed and finish your exam. So does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. All right. So